everyone, Ivy League Gaming here, and today we're playing Raid Shadow Legends, and we are continuing my series on talking about the Hydra heads. Now, this is video 3 of this series. We've already talked about a couple other heads, so if you missed those videos, go on and take a look. I'm trying to do a series of talking about each head and the ways we have to combat them and the best champions to use for doing so. Because honestly, when it comes down to it, it's not like you don't need a Krisk, a 2 Hanorok, a Duchess. You don't need those champions to make Hydra successful for you. Yeah, it makes it easier, but there are other champions that fulfill similar roles. And if you build things right, you can really progress well. So we're here, we're on the Hydra key for sake of boss guide information. And we're gonna pull up the Hydra head here. We're on Head of Mischief. Oh boy, this one's a fun one, but now that I understand it better, I don't have trouble beating it. So let's get to it. Alright, so the Head of Mischief, first skill here, attacks the enemy with the most buffs. Steals all the buffs from the target and then steals 50% of the target's turn meter. If there are multiple enemies with the same number of buffs, this will attack one of them at random. Will ignore Val and Perfect Val. And its decapitation effect fully depletes the turn meter of all Hydra heads whenever this head is decapitated. So that's nice. That can come in handy if you time that right. So this is one that I was really frustrated with at first, honestly. I just kind of dealt with the heads and didn't want to deal with resistance, right? The resistance you need is pretty hard to get on the champions for harder levels of Hydra without taking away from all of their other abilities, right? That's the hard part. It's like, if you put a bunch of resistance, you're taking away damage, maybe, or you're taking away some speed or some survivability. So that is the hard part with this, but the good thing about this first skill is, yes, it can be resisted. So when it comes to the most amount of buffs, there are ways we can hack this. But first, let's talk about the general resistance we need to ignore this. So let's pull up the Hell Hades Stages tool again. Hydra we're gonna click on, and then we're gonna go to Hydra, let's see, Hydra rotation 2, yes, that's what I'm talking about right now as it's on, but this will go the same for all the other rotations. Just take a look if it's different for you. But Head of Mischief, so its accuracy is 345 here on Brutal. That means we need 450 resistance to have a good chance at resisting the buff steal. Simple enough, right? Done. So I've been building most of my champions. When I get new champions that I want to use for Hydra, if that's the only place I think I'm going to use them, I'm just straight up trying to build them with about 400 plus resistance. Luckily, a lot of the champions I'm using for Hydra, like Geomancer, for example, have an AoE decrease accuracy debuff that they place in the Hydra heads. So with that AoE decrease accuracy buff, you don't have to quite hit those higher numbers if you're going to be reliably placing that debuff and keeping it consistently on the heads. So at the very least, you definitely want to make sure that the Head of Mischief always has a decreased accuracy debuff on him. That will help to have a less chance of him actually stealing your buffs. But there's another way to cheese this besides making an entire team with 400 resistance, which is hard to do, right? I mean, when it comes down to it, it's resources, it's silver, it's changing your masteries maybe. Like, there's a lot to deal with for rebuilding people for Hydra. And this is something, honestly, I would just slowly work on that. If you want to start improving your Hydra, you do need to build people for Hydra. When you do regular Clan Boss, you build people for Clan Boss. It is what it is. We just got to do it. And if that's how you're going to focus your energy and your efforts improving your account, you're going to have to rebuild people. It is what it is. That's why I'm not doing Nightmare Hydra yet, because you see my Cardiel, you see my Duchess, you see my Siphies. they're in arena builds. I'm not going to get top tier level of performance out of them in Hydra when they're built for arena. It's just not going to happen. But sometimes you can kind of squeeze by, and I've been fine with doing brutal, hard, and normal Hydra myself. But let's continue the conversation here directly about this skill. So there's ways to cheese this, right? The enemy with the most buffs. So on your team, whoever has the most buffs, that's who it's going to try to steal from. So if you have my best example, let's go actually pull up Lord Chamfort. So Lord Chamfort used to be someone that people would call a Vault Guardian, even though we knew he could solo Ice Golem. He can solo some other stuff too, but when it comes to soloing Ice Golem, it's really, really slow, guys. There's other people that do it better. Don't worry about that. My poor Lord Chamfort is actually missing a glove right now because I stole it for, I think, Helicath or someone else. Don't judge. I'll fix him. But when it comes to Lord Chamfort, I had 450 resistance on him. Solid. I think I had like 460. So that way we're making sure that he has enough resistance to resist that pull from the Head of Mischief. And why him? It's his passive. So here we have, at the start of each turn, places a shield buff on this champion equal to 20% of their max HP for 2 turns. This will place a 15% decreased speed debuff on 1 turn whenever an enemy attacks this champion. So this is really nice here because if you don't have anyone else on the team with other skills like this, like that put up 1 single buff on themselves, he's always going to be the one with the most amount of buffs. Now, you do want to remember blood shield accessories. That's putting a shield up, guys. That's going to throw off the Head of Mischief. So that's another way you can actually cheese this. That's something to think about as well. The Head of Mischief, if you're using blood shield rings, you're probably going to want to take them off if you're trying to use a strategy like that with someone like Lord Chamfort that puts a buff on himself to where he's almost always going to be the person with the most buffs. Or you could do the opposite. You could have your entire team built normal, and then you have one person like that's good to have resistance on, like, I don't know, Lydia. Lydia's amazing. It's good to have resistance on her for sake of Doom Tower as well, right? So she's a good example of someone that might be worth putting a blood shield ring on Lydia. Or amulet, or banner, whatever. Putting a blood shield accessory on her, no one else. As long as there's nothing else that has a shield that's going to take the place of that blood shield ring, or whatever, in the run, then you know that Lydia is going to be the one who's targeted. Simple enough. Simple enough. So with that in mind, you can kind of force the Head of Mischief to be targeting one person, and that one person can have the high resistance. Then you don't have to worry about resistance on the rest of your team, for sake of the Head of Mischief at least. But like I discussed before, when it comes to most of these rotation of Hydra, we're also dealing with the Head of Blight, along with the Head of Mischief. So I personally like to put some resistance on everyone, at least a little bit, to even just like 300, just enough to where they're at least resisting the poisons most of the time as well. Plus that decreased accuracy debuff really also helps a lot. But that's the biggest thing with the Head of Mischief, is just trying to trick it so that it's not stealing your buffs. Or there's another way to trick it, right? There's a couple other ways. Way to combat that, number 2, besides having someone to target. Of course, well, I guess technically number 3. Number 1, have your entire team with high resistance. Number 2, have one person with high resistance that has more buffs than everyone else consistently. Number 3, use block buffs. Now, this current rotation of Hydra is quite friendly for that, because the block buffs is not going to get cleansed. We don't have a Head of Decay in this rotation. Unless we're unlucky. The unfortunate part of all of this, right, is the heads can pop up and surprise you later, and you're like, God damn it, bad RNG, let's start all over again. Plarium, if you're listening, please take out the RNG of the heads popping up. Let us worry about one rotation at a time and have teams for each rotation. Don't make us stress out about, is the Head of Decay going to pop up during my current rotation number 2 that does not have the Head of Decay? Come on, man, right? Am I right? But let's just pretend the Head of Decay is not here. Block buffs is going to be your best friend. The Head of Mischief can't steal your buffs if you have a block buffs debuff on him. Simple enough, right? Block buffs. I guess the next way to combat it would be a buff stripper, Madame Ceres, Seer, and there's quite a few others, let's be honest, but I'm going to mention them for the main parts because Madame Ceres is so good. Or you can have someone who decreases the duration of buffs, like a Godseeker Aniri that I love so much. If they steal your buffs, at least be able to take them back, right? That's a hope. There's a lot of champions that have A1s that also steal buffs, or A2s, like even Geomancer has that A2 that can steal 2 buffs. It also can just remove them or steal them depending on if HP burn is placed or not. So he's just such a good Hydra champion. So that's just another thing that makes him amazing. And he's also good when the Head of Mischief is around for that reason. Alright, so on that's the biggest thing of combating this boss. But I'm going to continue reading his skills and make sure we don't miss anything else. So this is the worst, right? This is the worst. Spoils of Mischief. Applies a buff spread effect, taking all the buffs from this head, placing them on other heads. Changes the duration of all spread buffs to 2 turns. So you'll notice sometimes if he steals a buff that only has 1 turn, he spreads them to everyone else and they have 2 turns. Luckily, he still only has the 1 turn. But the last thing you want is to throw up a block damage, a veil, an ally protect, and have the Head of Mischief spread it to everybody. So if you're not ready to combat the Head of Mischief with high resistance on at least one person that, like we talked about, then you're going to want to be prepared to have someone like a buff stripper in your rotation. Now, personally, I have multiple Madame Cereses, and I just pulled a 3rd one, and I think I'm going to make my 2nd. I only use 1 in arena typically, even in my 3v3 offense. So I think I'm going to make my 2nd Madame Ceres that already has masteries, skills, etc. I think I'm going to rebuild her for sake of Hydra alone with just the right amount of accuracies and resistances, because she also puts up a shield. Don't forget, she's going to mess with that thing. But she is going to be really great to keep in with War Master Mastery as well, for sake of Hydra. She's going to be so great. But again, keep in mind who you're pairing together. So if you're going to do the strategy like I do with Lord Chamfort sometimes, you can't have a Madame Ceres in there. You can't have a Duchess in there either. Or else they're going to do the same thing. They both have passives, or like Duchess A1 that puts up a shield that is going to affect who the target is. So you really got to be careful there. Someone puts a shield on the champion with the lowest HP. Well, that's going to change depending on what's happening in this Hydra run. So you can't make sure that that person that's getting the shield is actually going to have enough resistance. So when it comes to those champions like that, you're going to have to make sure you're using them on a team with full resistance, or, well, Madame Ceres, right? If she does that, luckily, and she could also undo it, luckily, with removing buffs to their A2 and her A3. So she's super helpful for Hydra. But let's finish up here with the passive. Just like all the other Hydra heads, we have very similar passive. So this one is annoying. Has a 75% chance of redirecting an enemy attack to another random head. Will not occur if this head is under Hex. So this head, not only is this head annoying with its buffs, but sometimes you can't even steal its buffs because it doesn't let you attack it. Unless you are working with a Hex champion. Now, personally, I've found in the higher levels of Hydra, not worrying about this and just kind of having AoE champions to do damage, having AoE buff strippers like Madame Ceres if you need that instead, because throwing in a champion that only does Hex is just not enough utility to fight this boss. I feel like it's not really worth it in the end to throw in someone if Hex is their only utility, unless it's someone that has multiple great utility like a Mithrala that we get from Hydra. She's insane. She's a cleanser. She also puts up Hex, so you can make sure that you can target this boss. So this is one of those things you have to be careful of, because you have the chance of not actually attacking the boss even though you target it. You've got to be careful when it comes to that Head of Mischief eating one of your champions. Once it's consumed someone and you're trying to get it back, if you don't have an AoE champion, you're probably screwed. So this is where, if you don't have an AoE champion or Hex for damage, sorry, AoE champion for hit damage, or Hex to make sure you can actually attack this champion, you might be kind of screwed. Luckily though, the placing seems to be okay. Like placing HP burn and weaken from Geomancer, it goes there. You don't have to worry about it. It prevents attacks, but it doesn't prevent placing. So if you have a single target place of something, you're okay. You don't have to worry because it's not an attack. That's something to be very careful of with a lot of these skills, is understanding that placing is very different than attacking. When you attack something, you can get a weak hit, and that means the debuff doesn't place. But when you place, you don't have to worry about a weak hit. So you don't have to worry about something not placing for that reason. You don't have to worry about affinity for that reason. So that's why people like Mordecai, Geomancer, are so good for Hydra, because they place HP burn. Just keep that in mind for some of the other heads like we've discussed. But, alright, just like the others too, same thing. The head cannot, max HP damage cannot exceed 10% of the head's max HP. HP burn only does so much damage. Simple enough. And this one actually, this head, alright, so, okay, this one does have immunity to poison, so that's a bummer too. Some of them you can place poisons, but they just don't do as much damage. But this one is immune to stun, freeze, sleep, provoke, block active skills, block passive skills, fear, true fear, poison, and petrification debuffs. Also immune to HP exchanges, HP balancing effects, cooldown increasing effects, max HP reduction effects, and turn meter reduction effects. Whew, so there we have it, guys. The Head of Mischief, like I said, your best friends with this are resistance teams, or one champion like Lord Chamfor that can be the target of the Head of Mischief. And then when it comes to its other skill, you might want a Hex champion in there, or at least have an AoE damage dealer like Royal Guard or Husk in there in case your champion gets eaten by this head and you need to get it back, or else you're screwed. You're screwed. Or you have to start all over again with all RNG, and oh my goodness. That is the one thing I still am having trouble with enjoying Hydra. While I am enjoying progressing and learning and getting better and better with each rotation, the RNG factor's still there. I hope they change it, right? I hope they change it. All right, but that's all for now. We're going to stop here with talking about the Head of Mischief, and I will leave you guys with that. If you haven't seen the other videos, take a look. I'm going to do covering all the heads, so on to the next one.